They didn't say goodbye. They just turned off my bedroom light and closed the door behind them like I was already gone. I was 28 years old, sitting on the edge of my childhood bed, holding a positive pregnancy test I'd taken in the gas station bathroom on the way home from work. I'd driven the rest of the way in a kind of numb autopilot, telling myself that my parents would be upset, sure, but that they would come around. That's what parents did. They got upset, and then they came around. I was wrong. My dad had spoken first. He didn't raise his voice. That was somehow worse. He just looked at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into his living room and said, "You're not the daughter I raised." My mother stood behind him with her arms crossed and said nothing. She just pressed her lips together until they went white. I told them I was keeping the baby. I told them the father, a guy I'd been seeing for 7 months, someone I genuinely thought I had a future with, already knew and was figuring things out, which, I would later learn, was his way of saying he was figuring out how to disappear. My dad told me to sleep on it. I did, and in the morning, he knocked on my door and slid a piece of paper underneath it. It was a list of extended stay motels within 15 miles of their house. He'd circled 2 of them in red pen. I sat on the floor and stared at that piece of paper for a long time. I called my older brother. His name is the first thing I think of when I think about that year, not the pregnancy, not the father who vanished, not the months I spent so tired I could barely see straight. Just his voice on the phone when I called him that morning, still half asleep, and he said, "Wait, slow down, start over, where are you right now?" "I'm still at Mom and Dad's," I said. "Stay there," he said. "I'm coming." He lived 40 minutes away. He was there in 35. He didn't say much when he arrived. He shook our dad's hand, which I thought was strange, and then he came upstairs and helped me pack 2 suitcases. He carried both of them himself. When we got to his car, he put them in the trunk and then stood there for a second with his hand on the lid and looked up at the house. I don't know what he was thinking. He never told me. His apartment was a 2-bedroom in a building that smelled like the previous tenants had cooked a lot of fish. It wasn't glamorous, but he cleared out the spare room, which had been functioning as a storage unit for his camping gear, and approximately 400 pounds of textbooks from a graduate program he'd quit 2 years prior, and he set up the air mattress he'd had since college. And he said, "It's yours for as long as you need it." I said, "I'm pregnant. You understand that, right? Like, there's going to be an actual baby." He said, "I know what pregnant means." I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in 3 days. I was a licensed vocational nurse at a mid-sized orthopedic clinic at the time. Good job. Stable hours, benefits that covered prenatal care, which turned out to be a thing I needed very badly and very soon. I'd been there 4 years, and I was good at my work and I liked the people I worked with. And for a while, I told myself that this was enough, that I had my career, I had my brother, I had a place to sleep, and that was more than a lot of people had. The father, I'll call him the father, because that's all he ever really was, a noun with no follow-through, texted me 3 weeks after I moved in with my brother. The text said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking and I don't think I'm in a position to be a parent right now. I hope you understand." I read it twice. Then I screenshotted it and sent it to my brother, who responded with a single word that I won't repeat here. I didn't respond to the text. I saved the screenshot. The pregnancy was difficult in the way that first pregnancies often are. Relentless nausea through the first trimester, swollen ankles by month 6, a lower back that felt like it had been repeatedly hit with a sandbag. I worked until I was 34 weeks along, which my coworkers thought was either impressive or insane depending on who you asked. When I went on maternity leave, it was unpaid. The clinic was small enough that it fell under a different threshold for federal leave policy, and while I had some PTO saved, it ran out fast. My brother covered my share of rent for 4 months. He never once mentioned it. I know, because I kept track. I kept a running total in the Notes app on my phone, and I told him I would pay him back every cent, and he told me to stop talking about it. My daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in early March. She was 6 pounds, 14 ounces, and she had a full head of dark hair and a look on her face like she was already irritated by the world. The nurse who handed her to me said, "She's got opinions." I laughed again, the second time that year. My brother was in the waiting room. When they let him in, he stood in the doorway for a second and looked at her. And I watched something shift in his face. Not something dramatic, just something quiet, something that settled. "What's her name?" he said. I'd been going back and forth for weeks, but when I looked at her, I knew. "Ivy," I said. He nodded. "That's right," he said, like I'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. The first year was the year I learned what tired actually meant. I'd thought I knew. I'd worked 12-hour shifts. I'd pulled doubles. I'd studied for boards on 4 hours of sleep. But that was a different kind of tired, the kind you could sleep off. This was structural. This went all the way down. Ivy didn't sleep more than 3 hours at a stretch until she was almost 5 months old. I was back at work part-time by months too, because I couldn't afford not to be. And I was surviving on a combination of coffee, the pre-made meals my brother left in the fridge, and a sheer bloody-minded refusal to fall apart. My brother had converted to sleeping on his own couch full-time by this point. He said it was fine. I knew it wasn't fine. His couch was a love seat that was about 8 inches shorter than he was. But every time I brought it up, he'd redirect the conversation to whatever Ivy had done that day. She'd grabbed his finger. She'd started tracking movement with her eyes. She'd laughed, for the first time, at the dog in the apartment below us, heard through the floor. He was there for all of it. My parents were not. My mother sent a card when Ivy was born. A generic congratulations card, the kind you'd send to a coworker. No return address. I put it in a drawer and didn't look at it again. My dad sent nothing. Some of my friends, the ones who still checked in, would occasionally ask if I'd heard from them, and I'd say no, and they'd make a face that was trying to be sympathetic but kept sliding towards something that looked like they thought I should be doing more to fix it, like I should be the one to reach out, like being pregnant and abandoned and working full-time and raising an infant on a love-seat air mattress was not quite enough to earn a pass on making the first move. I stopped talking about it. It was easier. The father reappeared when Ivy was 7 months old. I got a text, same number, that said, "I've been thinking about you and wondering how things are going. Maybe we could talk." I didn't respond. He texted again 2 weeks later. This time he said he'd heard I'd had the baby and he wanted to be there going forward. I forwarded both texts to a family law attorney I'd found through a legal aid referral program. Her name was sharp and her advice was sharper. Document everything, respond to nothing without counsel, and file for child support immediately. I filed. The legal process was slow in the way that all legal processes are slow, not dramatic, just grinding. Months of paperwork and continuances and my attorney's calm voice on the phone, walking me through each step. The father retained his own attorney, which told me he'd found some money somewhere, and they tried a few maneuvers that my attorney described as standard delay tactics, which was her way of saying, "They're hoping you'll get exhausted and give up." I didn't give up. Meanwhile, Ivy grew. She went from infant to baby to toddler in what felt, from the inside, like both no time at all and approximately 900 years. She started pulling herself up on furniture at 10 months. She took her first steps in my brother's apartment, right in the middle of the living room, and he happened to be watching, and he let out a sound that wasn't quite a shout and wasn't quite a word. Just this pure, startled noise. And she looked at him and cracked up laughing. I cried. I told myself it was hormones. He didn't say anything because he's decent like that. Ivy called him by a nickname she invented herself, a variation of his actual name that she'd arrived at through whatever phonetic logic toddlers operate by. He answered to it immediately. He still does. By the time Ivy turned 2, I had a clear picture of what was keeping us alive. My salary, his generosity, and a logistical choreography so tight that one sick day could throw the whole week sideways. I'd moved from part-time back to full-time at the clinic, and I'd gotten a small raise, but childcare was a brutal line item. The wait list for the subsidized center near the clinic had been 2 years long when I'd put my name on it while I was still pregnant. I was still on it. My brother watched Ivy on my long days. He worked remotely, which helped. He could have her in the apartment with him while he was on calls, and he'd built an elaborate system of educational videos and craft supplies and, when all else failed, letting her help him type, which resulted in a lot of emails that he had to very carefully proofread before sending. I told him constantly that I was going to pay him back. He told me constantly to stop saying that. We had this conversation so many times it became a kind of routine, almost a joke. Except neither of us was really laughing. Ivy was 2 years and 9 months old when my attorney called me on a Thursday afternoon in October. I was in the break room at work eating a yogurt I didn't want, and I almost didn't pick up. Because I was due back on the floor in 4 minutes, and I was tired, and I'd had 3 of these calls in the last 2 months, and they'd all been about paperwork. I picked up. My attorney said, "I need you to sit down." I said, "I'm already sitting." She told me that the court had ruled that the calculation of arrears going back to Ivy's birth, combined with the ongoing monthly support order, was, and I want to get this number exactly right, because I've said it in my head so many times, since $61,400 in back pay, plus $1,400 per month going forward. I wrote the numbers on the back of a receipt I had in my pocket. I stared at them. "This is real?" I said. "It's real," she said. "The transfer timeline will be," and then she kept talking, but I'd sort of stopped being able to hear individual words. I was just sitting there in the break room, holding a yogurt and looking at numbers I'd written on a CVS receipt. I called my brother from the parking lot after my shift. I read him the numbers. He was quiet for a long time. "Say it again," he said. I said it again. He exhaled. "Okay," he said. And then after another pause, "Okay." That was it. That was the whole conversation. But I knew what he meant. After everything, the loves eat, the missed sleep, the dinners he left in the fridge, the 400 months of rent he'd covered, all those mornings watching Ivy so I could work, okay, meant it's going to be different now. I was in the middle of making Ivy's lunch on a Saturday, about 3 weeks later, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My brother had gone to the hardware store. Ivy was at the table behind me, very seriously arranging crackers into a pattern that she kept calling a design. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to the door. I looked through the peephole first, old habit from the apartment years. My parents were standing on the front porch. My mother had her hands folded in front of her. My father was slightly behind her, the way he always stood when something made him uncomfortable. They both looked older. That hit me before anything else, just how much older they looked. 3 years and some months. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. I stood at the door for a moment. Then I opened it. My mother looked at me and opened her mouth and closed it again. My father looked at the floor, then at the wall to the left of my head, then finally at my face. "We heard you're doing well," my mother said. Her voice was careful in the way voices are when people are trying very hard to control them. "I am," I said. There was a silence. And then Ivy came around the corner at full speed because she had heard the doorbell, and doorbells meant something interesting was happening, and she pulled up short when she saw 2 strangers on the porch and looked at them with the focused, assessing expression she always used when she was trying to decide whether a situation was safe. My mother made a sound. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't quite a gasp. It was quieter than that. She looked at Ivy the way you look at something you weren't prepared to see. And her face did something complicated. Recognition, maybe, and grief, and something else I didn't have a name for. Ivy looked up at me. "Who's that?" she said. I looked at my daughter. Then I looked at my parents. My father had taken half a step forward. His jaw was tight. He looked like a man trying to hold himself together in a public place. My mother's eyes were wet. She wasn't blinking. "These are people from before," I said to Ivy, "from a long time ago." Ivy considered this. She's a practical child. "Do they want crackers?" she said. Nobody spoke for a moment, and then my mother laughed. A real laugh, sudden and startled, the kind that surprised her as much as it surprised me. I stepped back from the door. I didn't say come in. I didn't say go away either. I just stepped back and left the space open and let them decide what to do with it. My mother stepped across the threshold. My father followed. I put the kettle on, not because I forgave anything. Not in that moment. Not all at once. Forgiveness isn't a door you open. It's a road you walk, and I was only at the very beginning of it. But I put the kettle on because Ivy was watching me, and because my brother would be home in 20 minutes, and because some things, not all things, but some, can begin again. My dad sat down at the kitchen table. He looked around at the house I had built without them. The photos on the refrigerator, the small pair of sneakers by the door, the crayon marks on the doorframe where I'd been tracking Ivy's height since she could stand. He looked at all of it, and something in his face broke open a little. He didn't apologize that day. That came later, slowly, in pieces, the way real apologies usually do. But he looked at what I'd made, and I watched him understand, for the first time, what it had cost. Ivy climbed into the chair next to him, bold as she's always been, no hesitation, and pushed the cracker design toward him with one small hand. "That's a zigzag," she told him seriously, "and that's a swirl." My father looked at her. He swallowed. "Those are very good," he said. His voice came out rough. He cleared it. "Can you show me how?" Ivy, who will show anyone how to do anything at any time, immediately started rearranging crackers. I turned back to the kettle. My hands were not entirely steady, but I was here. We were all here. And outside, I heard my brother's car pull into the driveway. And I thought, for just a second, about knocking on that hollow core of all those years, and feeling for the first time something other than empty on the other side. I think about that CVS receipt a lot. The one I wrote the numbers on in the parking lot after my shift, hands not quite steady, trying to make the math feel real. $61,400, $1,400 a month. 3 years of doing everything the hard way, and then one Thursday afternoon, a phone call that changed the shape of things. People want to call that luck. I understand why. It's tidier that way. But I've spent enough time sitting with the story to know that it wasn't luck. It was consequence. Everything that happened came directly out of choices. His choices, mine, my brother's, my parents'. The math of those choices ran quietly in the background for 3 years, and then it came due. The father made a choice to disappear, and the law eventually made him account for it. That's not poetic justice. That's just cause and effect, moving slowly the way it usually does. What I had to learn, and it took longer than I'd like to admit, was that I couldn't afford to wait for that accounting before I started building something. I had to build it anyway, in the meantime, without knowing if the meantime would ever end. That took something I didn't know I had until I needed it. Not toughness in the dramatic sense, not gritting your teeth and white-knuckling through. More like a quiet decision, made over and over again in ordinary moments, to keep going, to go back to work at 2 months postpartum, even when I was running on nothing. To file the paperwork even when the process felt infinite. To not let shame or exhaustion talk me into accepting less than what Ivy deserved. Resilience, I've learned, isn't a feeling. It's a habit. You practice it in small increments until it's just how you move through the world. And then there's what my brother did. He didn't do it for recognition. He didn't do it because someone was watching. He slept on a love seat that was 8 inches too short for him for 3 years, and he never once made me feel like a burden. And that kind of integrity, the kind that holds even when no one's keeping score, that is the thing I want Ivy to grow up understanding. That doing right by someone isn't a transaction, it's just who you decide to be. I didn't know what to do when my parents showed up at the door. Part of me wanted to close it, part of me understood that Ivy was watching. What I know now, standing on the other side of that afternoon, is that the wisest thing I ever did was refuse to become what had been done to me. I could have made the same choices they made, chosen pride over the person standing in front of me. I didn't. Not because I'm better than my anger, but because I'd had 3 years to think about what I actually wanted my life to look like. My dad asked Ivy to show him how to arrange the crackers. She did. Patiently, precisely, like it was the most important lesson she'd ever taught. Maybe it was. I'm still walking that road, but I know now what I'm walking toward.